So my name's Ollie Hughes. I work at Pivotal on the Spring team. So most of my focus really is with cloud technology, Kubernetes, and this kind of scripting thing is a big part of my day job. That's why I'm sort of really passionate about how we can make things better, really. So, question: what three things do you find sort of in every software project? So, kind of a little bit of a story, but so I guess scripting itself has been around one form or another, sort of as long as high-level languages and people were writing COBOL and things like that. So there's always been this kind of need to move files around, to run a compiler, or to collect data from some output or another. So I remember when I sort of first started out, my very first sort of intern IT job, sort of a few years ago now, the first thing I ever had to do was help fix this massive set of Visual Basic scripts. So basically the entire company, for some reason, operated on these VB scripts, and it was a sort of an absolute nightmare. It was sort of a real terrible experience, probably enough to put me off software for life, really. So the kind of thing that's so bad, it's like these things like you have global state and you change some variable and it's somehow mutated a whole load of other stuff, and testing basically meant you had to just deploy it to a server, copy a file around or something. Things have moved on leaps and bounds from then. I'm happy to say there's sort of all kinds of DevOps tools available now, and the kind of things like configuration as code is really ubiquitous, and people are following really good practices. So what three things do we find on every software project? So a caffeine addict always, a Magic the Gathering player, and this massive script over 50 lines long that no one on the team understands. So kind of the question, why do we still need to do this? We've been doing the same kind of automation for so long now. You'd think that everything's so patterned now that there's no kind of need to sort of write our own scripts. But I guess for me at least, there's always there's no kind of one size fits all. There's some things that you always have in common in a project, but there's always kind of a requirement that a project might have talking to an external API, or kind of calling some custom commands. So so kind of things that are really common, at least. So where we got our kind of CI/CD pipelines and things, there's there's things like maybe you have to publish an artifact. A company might have its own kind of bespoke system like S3 or something, or there might be a number of custom CLI tools that you sort of need to interact with. There's also things like, so for example, there might be things like creating a Git tag, for example. You might have to pull a Docker container. There's also things like kind of repetitive tasks. So I think I can remember one example when I had to fill out a timesheet every week, and it was always the same kind of number that you had to put in every week. So instead of logging into some web GUI, I just kind of wrote a script that saved me time, kind of instead of having to log into the web browser every week. So it's these kinds of things where it's really important to our job as developers how to kind of make our lives easier and automate things. So excuse myself, a quick drink. So I guess scripting isn't always the right tool for the job. So I guess there's sort of automation needs and things, but so there's kind of some anti-patterns as well, where things maybe it isn't the right tool to write your own script. So one sort of classic example is I think these days it's really common that a lot of us are working with sort of cloud resources and having to provision sort of cloud software. So there's really good APIs available for that. The cloud providers all provide sort of these really solid sort of CLIs and APIs, but the problem, what makes it hard is that you have to do it in an idempotent way usually. So I think usually you're sort of much better off using a tool such as sort of Terraform or Amazon Cloud Formation or something like that. Again, with sort of build tools and things like Maven, there's some really good, well-tested plugins. And sometimes if they fit your requirement, it's instead of reinventing the wheel, it's much better to kind of use one of these pre-baked resources if you can. Same thing goes with things like CI tools, stuff like Concourse has resources that you can use. It does really useful things like publish artifacts or kind of pull a Git server. And Jenkins as well has a some solid plugins that you can use instead of having to kind of write your own scripts and things. So I guess for me, one of the kind of key reasons I've looked to sort of Kotlin instead of kind of using Bash is I think it's just so much easier to reason about. So the kind of Bash scripts I've got up on the screen, there's nothing inherently wrong with this. It's just an example of this sort of fairly kind of archaic syntax that you quite often find. For example, like you have to have the colons have significant meaning, and if you don't kind of have like the kind of $@ symbol in quotations, that can cause problems, and it's hard for the IDE to warn you about it, and it's very easy. You can kind of make that script work with missing out some fundamental kind of things, but it will be kind of much less maintainable over time. What's good about using things like Kotlin instead of Bash for scripting is that there's things like type safety is going to kind of make it much more maintainable in the long term. So, sort of talk a little bit about sort of why Kotlin, why not something else. So, I guess this is a Spring conference, and most of you are probably sort of Java developers or working with a JVM at least. So, I think Kotlin's one of the great things about it. It's for Java developers. It's really easy, super easy to learn, and it's really expressive. So some of the things that are maybe quite painful to do in Java, like there's much better ways of doing it in Kotlin. So things like if statements, things you can use like a when, which is much more expressive. And I think that lends itself really well to kind of writing scripts where you've got to kind of deal with quite messy requirements, often quite messy sort of data. It's sort of doing the kind of sort of job, but where things aren't always that clean cut. So Kotlin, I think, lends itself really well to it. The tooling is really good, and one of the main reasons is because the great folks at JetBrains invented the language. So the integration with IntelliJ IDEA is fantastic. It's got really good kind of context-sensitive help, and it tells you when you're doing the wrong thing. Your code might compile, but in IntelliJ you'll get like a little yellow marking saying, actually, maybe you could do it this way, and that's gonna be better. So that's a big advantage for me anyway. And again, the third-party libraries that are available is really extensive because you can import Java libraries. There's all kinds of things out there to interact with different APIs, different types of libraries and all sorts. So I think that Java heritage is really the JVMs are really well tested, really solid. So I think what's a good use case for Kotlin scripting. I think basically any time, in my opinion, that you would be writing a Bash script is a valid case to investigate Kotlin. So it's, I think if there was what I would say is a really good time to use it, if you maybe want to kind of build your own sort of kind of config generation. So only these days, everyone's using YAML, right? So it can get quite messy, and sometimes something like Kotlin can be a really good tool for perhaps generating YAML or templating it, or other types of config, dealing with JSON. The other area it really sort of shines for me is dealing with kind of HTTP APIs and sort of parsing JSON. So there's some really great APIs out there for that. So there's one called Fuel, which is worth looking at, and Ktor as well, and there's a number of others. So instead of kind of just using the standard Java libraries, like there's been a few teams that have gone out and actually built new kind of abstractions that are more, I don't know what you call the word, it's like they're suited for Kotlin, so they're suited for working with Kotlin, these libraries, so you can make a really nice expressive script. So okay, what I was really nervous, I didn't want to make this talk kind of too bogged down in code examples. So I think what I really wanted to do is kind of give you a flavour of why Kotlin and kind of what it looks like, and what the basic kind of tools you would need to kind of start using Kotlin as a scripting language. So this is just the most basic hello world example that you could possibly do. So there's two files. There's your hello.kts. Now the KTS has kind of sort of meaning in Kotlin. So one of the things it means is that you don't need a main method. So that's literally all you have in the file. It skips out the main method altogether. And by default, the Kotlin compiler has this script flag. So you can just say Kotlin C minus script, and it will just just do that. It will just print hello world. Okay, so as I updated my Kotlin recently, I found actually that this example, and I wanted to point this out for if you go and try this out yourself. So actually, there's a bug in the latest version of Kotlin that means that you can't do the example as I showed it there. Now, that's okay, because I'm going to go on and tell you another way of doing it anyway. But if you were to follow this example verbatim, you just need to be aware that you have to downgrade your Kotlin basically. So, okay, so this is what I was getting onto. You don't actually need to call the Kotlin compiler directly. So there's this really amazing tool called KScript. Really, what it is, it's a wrapper around the kind of Kotlin compiler and that script flag that makes it much easier to write Kotlin scripts with. And I definitely recommend it. I think this is, at the moment, as we are today, this is the way to do it. So you can install it with this SDK man, which is a really great tool in itself. It lets you kind of manage multiple versions of Java, multiple versions of Gradle and Groovy. So it's definitely worth having. The other way you can do it, if you've got a Mac, is install it using Brew. And you can just, depending, maybe in some organizations, these kind of tools are a little bit frowned upon, so you can just kind of check out the source code and compile it using Gradle. So using KScript, well, the initial benefit is that you only need one file, so you don't, the runner has gone away now, and instead I've just got this little hashbang. And that works, and also that works with the latest version of Kotlin. You don't have to worry about downgrading it, which is good. So one of the other kind of challenges you're going to face as soon as you sort of, let's say you're starting to write a script in Java, for example, you're not going to get particularly far, I don't think, because you would quite soon you'd find that you want some third-party library or another rather than just using the standard library. And actually, this is stolen from Groovy, to be honest. There's a library called Grape, which does a very similar thing. So you could use this. So I could substitute this talk and say Groovy instead, but I personally would look to Kotlin just because I think it's got that greater expressiveness, and the type safety is just really great. So you could use, if you chose, you could use Groovy as well. So what you've got these annotations here. And they basically let you define, so the Maven repository, you can put that if you want a separate, if you were using like Spring snapshots or something like that, you can define that here in the file inline, and then you just put your sort of depends on here, and then you just import it like any other file. So arguments is it's basically the same as if there was a main method, except that the args is just magically there, like it would be with a main method. Now, what you probably would do in reality is kind of import some extra CLI library. There's a few out there, like Pico CLI. There's a few different ones, and that's going to give you a better experience with actually being able to pass flags and validate the command line arguments. But this, as far as the script is concerned, this is what it gives you, and you can do whatever you want with that. So I don't want to go through every single KScript feature. Go with the GitHub repo. It's a really great project, and have a look at all the different things it does. One of the really cool things is that you can actually package a script up. So it will basically create like a fat jar. So you can then take your script and package it up, and then you can deploy that anywhere where there's Java. So it's actually really flexible. You can also package it up with a KScript installer itself as well. So you can actually kind of give someone a script that says, I'll go off and install KScript, and then I'll run the script. And as long as you've got a valid Java, then it all should work. So you can also like pipe text into KScript. You can use it like you would like a CLI tool like Awk or something. So you can do sort of text processing and things. And you can load it into IntelliJ, so you can use a REPL. So if you're trying to debug your script, it's really useful to be able to kind of just load it up and actually see what's going on there. And again, it's just giving you that kind of extra bit of not having. So you could use Awk or something in the same way, but then you've got to learn this sort of syntax with Kotlin. It's just giving you that things that the rest, hopefully, all of your team could have a look at the script and kind of understand in a meaningful way. So It's a little bit, so this is different from standalone scripting. So another kind of use case for Kotlin scripting is if your application needed some kind of script for some reason. So that could be like a configuration file. So, so for example, if you ever use JetBrains TeamCity, their whole configuration is Kotlin based. So if you didn't want to inflict YAML on your users, you wanted it to be really nice and say you could have a nice Kotlin DSL instead for your application. This is like a really useful way of being able to sort of load in that file and actually be able to use it in a useful way. I've actually, in my project I worked on once, the customer basically had a requirement where they wanted to write their own code and not compile it, which is madness. But this is a way you could do that and actually let them kind of write their own kind of strategies or something. If you had an algorithm that had some kind of strategy pattern, you could let them create the little Kotlin script and actually execute that in a safe kind of sandbox. And a brilliant example of something that's got in recently been committed is in Spring Cloud Contracts. They've got a Kotlin DSL and it uses a similar approach to that. So you can define contracts using Kotlin now. So really worth, and if you haven't seen that project, go and have a look at it because it's really awesome. So one of my other really kind of big bugbears is that you get these, on every project you get the massive script and there's never any sort of tests associated with it. So one thing you can do now with Kotlin script, and you can basically import import a script file, then you can just use that in your test framework and your JUnit tests, so you can assert on sort of different functions and things that are inside of the script. And again, it's just, you know, letting you apply proper software engineering practices to this kind of ad hoc scripting. So things are a little bit confusing at the moment. So there's a proposal from the Kotlin team to kind of bring in scripting support into the core of Kotlin itself. And at the moment, I would still use KScript for standalone scripts. And the reason is that it's just for actually using, you can't use like a hashbang or anything like that with the internal Kotlin scripting support. And I think in the near future, it will hopefully encompass all that KScript does, and you won't need a separate library. So at the moment, it's kind of a bit of a confusing world. But where the Kotlin scripting support, where you do need that, is if you're doing things like importing like a script into your main Kotlin application, or like I showed you in the couple of slides previous. So if you've got a more advanced use case, if you're writing a Kotlin DSL for your app or something, you need to look at the scripting support. Okay, so it's not perfect. In my opinion, the biggest problem is the JVM startup penalty. So on my MacBook Pro, it was about 5 seconds just to launch a script. So that, yeah, a bash script's going to be instantaneous. So that is a frustration. It isn't great. It depends on the context. So I think if it was some kind of automated batch job, it probably isn't a big problem, but maybe it's enough of a frustration to put you off. There is a way you can make it better, and I think it will get better. And I think the answer is either Kotlin native or GraalVM. So what this lets you to do is create like a native image, so an actual compiled small image, and I played around with it, and that is much faster. You're talking like milliseconds. So the problem is, depending on the complexity of your app, what your app's doing, you might hit some problems. So if you're sort of targeting like a Linux or a Mac environment, you might need to be interfacing with some C libraries. So for example, there's a library called Ktor, which does have native support, but if you want to use the HTTP client, it backs off to curl. So you might find yourself having to work around some issues that using just the JVM you wouldn't have. And the other thing that you might hit problems with, anything to do with reflection, you generally need to tell up in advance at compile time, you need to say, I'm going to use reflection, and you need to sort of say what's going to be reflected upon. So, and I think these technologies, they are the future, because of containerization. Everyone wants small, fast images. So definitely, I think it is going to get better. I think for me, distribution of JVM is less of an issue. I mean, it isn't ideal, but now everyone's using containerization. The JVM, we're all probably working with the JVM anyway. It's so ubiquitous now. For me, really, that isn't such an issue. But for some people, they would kind of maybe complain, oh, you've got to bundle a Java with it. So just things to bear in mind, really. So yeah, thanks, and follow me on Twitter if you want. I haven't got many followers, so yeah, and yeah, thanks. And any questions, please fire away.
What is the fundamental difference of running a script in Kotlin versus running it natively through the JVM? Is it the same performance?
So the question was, what is the difference between running a script using the kind of KScript or Kotlin scripting support versus just building it as usual, running it through the JVM? So the difference is, yeah, it's like you said, really it's the entry point and it's the steps you go through. So to write a Kotlin script, you just have one file and that's it. You don't have to worry about having like a Gradle build file or having to run the compiler or having to, so you might have to declare dependencies in a pom.xml or Gradle.build. So there's just more steps. So it's really just making the developer's life easier. That's the.
So it's still a jar underneath the hood?
So you're not generating, there's no packaging.
Right.
No, so that doesn't happen. It's just running the Kotlin compiler kind of like in line. And
the same compiler?
Yes, the same compiler, yeah. Okay. Yeah, so that KScript is just a wrapper around the Kotlin compiler.
Okay.
Yeah. Cool.
Do you imagine that the Kotlin scripting support will eventually have like the hashtag support, all the things that KScript currently has?
Yeah, I think that is, from what I've read online and in the forums, that is where it's going. I think where the KScript stuff has already got it there. I think the Kotlin team are possibly focused on other areas like they're kind of hosting a Kotlin script within the JVM and things like that. But I definitely think that's yeah, that's a goal as I understand it. And you can read through the Keep proposal, and that does mention that in there. It's just not implemented as far as I can see. So.
Do you anticipate there will be a better solution to that 5-second delay that you mentioned for loading JVM?
I don't think so. The solution is a native image, as far as I can see. I think that's just a problem with general kind of Java, the JVM as a whole. I think there's ways you can make it. But I think where there's no kind of caching or anything like that. It's just kind of running it, compiling it from fresh every time. So. From as I understand it, there's.
It seems like if you can install KScript, you could install KScript for your machine, and
right.
Natively, and that would eliminate it, right?
Yeah, that's a good point, and that's actually I should have mentioned that. So that would be, that's a very good point. That if you could actually have a native image of the thing that kind of loads the Kotlin script, that would definitely improve performance as well. And I think I did see some experiments there where you basically got their native image binary. Yeah, right. Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. Yeah, so that would be because at the moment it is just like it's KScript jar file that's loading a script, and that's where you've got your yeah. But there will still be I think loading the script itself are probably going to be a bit of a penalty, but definitely not. No way. Yeah. Any other questions? Great. Well, thanks everyone. It's been great.